Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Using DJI Drones for Mosquito Control webinar. I'm Linda Glover, excuse me, the GIS Sales and Services Manager here at Frontier, and I'm the team lead for our GIS Services, Software Development, and Water Resources Group. And my colleague and co-presenter today is Mike Clarenbeek, one of our certified UAS pilots, and he's got a background in aviation and teaching. And before I just turn the time over him to get started, just a little housekeeping. For questions today, if you want to log them under the questions window there on the Go to Meeting menu, the questions will automatically be recorded into a spreadsheet, and then we'll answer them and then email that spreadsheet out to you later this week. So Mike, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Linda, and happy to be here. Talk to everybody a little bit kind of what's happening on the UAS side in Frontier Precision, and especially related to mosquito control. So just a little bit of background. Hold on one second. Just give me the next slide here.
Is your mic moved there?
I'm not in the presentation. Just give me 1 second here. Okay. So a little bit of background. So I came to Frontier Precision with a background really in unmanned aircraft systems. I went to the University of North Dakota and got my commercial flight instructor license along with the license in the remote pilot certificate, which came later after I graduated. But I'm responsible for conducting all the training, the Part 107 training, and also the equipment training at Frontier, and really specializing in kind of the DJI product line. So the specific systems we're going to be talking about today, kind of defined here, less than 55 pounds, and then that's kind of just a description there of the systems we're talking about, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that definition. So what I always tell people when they're talking about drones is don't think of it as this big ominous thing out there. Think of it as a tool, really. You have lots of tools to do your job every day, and what we're looking to do is just make things a lot more efficient, accomplish tasks at a lot lower cost and a lot higher efficiency. So same thing here as with any industry using drones today is that we're going to be using this as a tool, and we want to be able to accomplish things at a much lower cost and higher efficiency. So those three areas, again, this can be really a lot of different industries, but especially related to mosquito control. Those areas are safety, cost, time, and efficiency. So in relation to safety, it's kind of a funny picture here. I just pulled that one off the internet, but you know, there's a lot of different examples, and again, you guys probably have more examples than I can even come up with, but of areas that are hard to get access to. You might have to climb fence, you might have to go through a lot of you know, kind of marshland, that kind of stuff. And in all the companies that we've worked with that are using this equipment, they're basically now launching it from the edge of the road or a controlled area. Able to fly and cover a lot more ground without having to worry about going through some thick trees, like I said, over fences, that kind of stuff, to where that can be a lot more hazardous to people out there in the field. That message. Okay, then cost time. So obviously you have to get the job done as best as you can, and before this kind of tool was introduced, that means, you know, getting out there by whatever means possible, whether that's going to be a four-wheeler, truck, on foot, all those things, and really that's a time saver. So your time is going to be your cost in this case. You know, how much area can you cover, how quickly, and how efficiently, which will ultimately affect the cost of getting this kind of survey done. And then efficiency, just kind of the bullet points saying there, you're going to be getting to the site instantly. You're not going to have to worry about getting all of that gear ready to check across the ground there. You're going to have access right away. You're going to see exactly what you want to see in a relatively short period of time. So kind of why I'm sure most of you guys tuned in is really kind of the different equipment currently offered. And what I tell a lot of people is it kind of breaks down into two different categories for any industry. It's the enterprise quality of products and the consumer quality of products. And in a lot of cases, your consumer drone is more than enough than what you really need. But when people get into more specific tasks and they pay attention to kind of what their aircraft is certified to do or designed to do, they're really going to start looking at the enterprise line of products. So cost is a big differential between these two lines of product. There's a lot of options in the consumer market, a lot of easily accessible options. Your typical cost range here is going to be anywhere from $100 to $5,000, depending on how advanced you want to go. And this is a great place to start, quite frankly, for a lot of different agencies. You have not a lot of cost into it. You can learn a lot of things. It kind of gets your toes wet a little bit before you really jump in and decide that you want to implement this technology across all phases of mosquito control. So really the downside to the consumer drone is it's not designed for what you exactly want to do. So it's going to be designed for the consumer just to go out there, do some pictures, some video. It has that design in mind as a consumer versus kind of the specific industry itself. So there's really only one camera when it comes down to the consumer line of product, and that's what we call the RGB camera, but red, green, blue camera. It's just your regular camera, just like a cell phone camera or something like that. And this consumer level of drone can take basic pictures. You can have maybe some advanced zooming a little bit, but it's usually pretty limited. The advantages of these cameras are very low cost, so you don't have to pay a lot of money to get these cameras. Like I said earlier, cell phones have these cameras. There's a lot of them out there, so the same technology is put into these drones, and it keeps the cost really, really low. The disadvantage is the limited capability. So these drones are all designed really for that camera and that payload. So when the manufacturer makes this product, especially DJI, they do have some safety margin. So, take the Phantom 4, which is pictured there below. The payload there, it does have the ability to carry some weight, but that's really, that ability is really designed as more of a safety margin to when they go out there and they say, okay, this aircraft can fly in 25-mile-an-hour winds. It can do this temperature range, this altitude. And if you look at kind of aircraft flight characteristics, there's a wide envelope of what this thing is designed to do. And that payload really is the safety margin that drone has available. So the minute you start strapping a bunch of stuff to the Phantom, you're really taking it out of what it's designed to do. And again, that's kind of the consumer drawback, is that they're not really designed with that intention of strapping a whole bunch of things to your Phantom, that kind of thing. Not that it's not possible, but it's not what it's designed for, so you're operating out of kind of the design characteristics of the drone. Okay, then you get into the enterprise setups. So the enterprise type equipment is going to really have best results for whatever your specific task is. So if your task is, let's say, to use like a thermal camera or something like that, or you want to be able to change sensors, that kind of stuff, or if you have a complete custom solution, your enterprise setup is going to be designed specifically for that. This is going to have a much higher range because those sensors can be very, very expensive. So even the flight platforms to carry these things will range anywhere from $5,000 to $40,000. Now I'm going to give an example here on this next slide of LIDAR. LIDAR is extremely expensive technology, but like any technology with time, it gets smaller and it gets cheaper. We have we're kind of in the revolution of self-driving car technology. A lot of this crosses over to LIDAR. And so we're seeing just general cost of LIDAR go down, but it's still very, very expensive. So you're still going to be way over that, $40,000 price that I gave you, just because the sensor is really a separate cost from just the flight platform itself. But LIDAR, I mean, a lot of people are interested in that just because of the high precision measurements that it can give, the ability to, see what's below canopy of the trees, those kinds of things. So for some people, this makes a lot of sense. You can cover a pretty big area. You can see a lot of things. But there's going to have some drawbacks. Like I said earlier, the technology is still shrinking, so it's still pretty heavy. So you're limited to what platforms you can carry this technology on. And, that also lowers your flight time. So you're not going to be up doing just general pictures with LIDAR. You're going to be doing a very specific task, whether that's getting different elevations, trying to find low spots, that kind of stuff. It's very specific use, and you're not going to be able to use it across different regions. Okay. So what kind of boiled down the mosquito control mission here? You can see locate water, identifying areas of interest, measuring population and application. And really, you're going to have probably a drone or two for different areas. So consumer drone can cover some of those areas, but enterprise will be really some of the, more specific to the more challenging areas here to accomplish. And what I usually tell people is, if you get your toes wet with a small one, that's still going to increase the efficiency of the overall operation, even if you can't hit every task here. Because a lot of people come at this like, oh, we need drones for every little, phase to make our life so much easier. Well, if you try and bite off more than you can really chew, that can kind of bog down the process. So I always, tell people try and do a couple of these things, get the ball rolling, get your pilots up to speed, and then start tackling these bigger problems with these larger cost items. So what Frontier has done is create a couple packages, really just to kind of get people started using the UAS technology and introducing kind of to the training side a little bit as well, which I'll talk to you in a couple slides. But right now we have the Tier 1 and Tier 2 packages put together, and basically what is included in these packages, everything we think that you need basically to get started, fired up, and kind of have your solution. Again, these different tiers aren't going to do everything you want, but they're definitely going to get you started and down the right path. So Tier 1, kind of our lower cost solution. It's called the Mavic 2 Enterprise Zoom. And the reason that we went with the enterprise version versus the consumer version, which is a little lower cost, is it just has a wider operating range. So it can operate a little bit more winds, a little bit lower temperatures. So it's more expandable to different regions. So it makes a little bit more sense there. The Tier 2, again, this is just another expansion in kind of your operating envelopes and the cameras that you can now put on this aircraft. So now you can operate in a little bit of moisture if it's raining or snowing. It has an IP rating. It also has a wide temperature range, and then also high wind. So if you have an area of a lot of wind, again, this is really just kind of your operating range envelope here with the 200 and expands your operations. So you can have that consistency. Future packages. So what we're working on right now, we obviously see those other missions like application coming down the pipe here. So we want to stay on top of that, and we relayed that to DJI as well. They do have a spray drone right now. It's just liquid only right now, but we hope that they do granial in the future and develop something for that as well. That would be our Tier 3 package, and then LIDAR. What I mentioned earlier, we do have some LIDAR packages that we offer. We just have not had a really good extensive test to do with it in related to mosquito control. Obviously, Frontier Precision does a lot of survey and GIS type work as well. So they've used LIDAR in those areas and really kind of expanding that capability into the mosquito control area. So with the Tier 1 and Tier 2 packages, how we can make your life easier is using these images and these videos that they can provide you. Again, for a relatively low price, you're able to get geotagged images, which just means the location is tied to the image, and that image can be tied into the software, which Linda's going to talk a little bit about here in a couple more slides. But It can be tied into software, so that way anybody across any platform, like if they have their phone or if they have a computer desktop, they can pull up the image and say, yeah, that looks like an area we definitely need to pay more attention to. And then that's communicated. Really what it comes down to is using the data in the correct way and being able to share it and access it really easily, just to make the process more efficient. So what a lot of people tend to overlook are the rules for using this equipment for kind of what we're talking about here. Not that everybody does. I think a lot of people end up figuring this out. But in September 2016, they came out with Part 107, which is what regulates the FAA passes, or the FAA enforces, I should say. And Part 107 regulates the use of small unmanned aircraft. It issues the remote pilot certificate. So under these set of rules, we can follow the rules and be legal once you're certified to use this equipment. Before that, before 2016, which is not that long ago, they had basically what's called the COA process, which is still in place, and then the 333 exemption process, which some of you are probably familiar with if you've been doing this for a while. So that process, the 333 exemption, was basically saying that, hey, we want to use this equipment. We need to operate outside the current rule structure, because before 2016 they didn't really have a rule structure, and it listed parameters that you had to operate within. The COA is a certificate of authorization. This is an option if you are a public entity, that you can kind of declare that to the FAA, and if you're going to do a lot of application, that kind of thing, the COA process might make more sense to an agency doing that, because it allows you to have a conversation with the FAA and say, hey, we're going to be doing this application, we're going to be doing this and this. It's going to be kind of hard for us to follow Part 107, so we want to kind of have our own set of rules. And yeah, like I said, it gives you that conversation with the FAA. So it's a little bit longer, lengthier process, a little bit more paperwork. Part 107 is definitely a quick turn way of doing it. And a lot of times, a lot of our clients will end up doing both, or usually they just end up doing 107. But if they do both, the 107 portion really covers the training that's required when they get a COA, because the FAA still wants to see that your pilots are being trained and have an understanding of who they're sharing the airspace, that kind of thing. What's the future look like? Well, the good thing is Part 107 was designed to be very flexible, so you can actually get what's called a waiver if you do need to operate outside of a rule in Part 107, and those waivers eventually turn into actual rules that are developed in Part 107. A good example, and what's on the kind of the radar right now of the FAA is to do a notice of proposal for rule changing to the flying at aircraft at night and flying directly over people. So they're planning on changing that. Right now it's out for comment, but those rules are always changing. So, in the future, it'll become more and more flexible to operate under Part 107. As they see these waivers being issued, they implement that into Part 107 based on kind of the accident rate or the feedback they're getting out of the waivers. And as long as they're 100% safe, they see no reason not to make that an official rule of Part 107. So how to become a UAS pilot. So this is just like any other pilot certificates. It's a little different in the fact that you don't actually need flight training on the specific UAS aircraft. So is it a good idea? What I usually tell people, well, if you're comfortable with losing whatever the dollar value is, then yeah, you probably don't have to worry about getting training on the aircraft. But if you're concerned about the safety of it and the dollar value and that kind of thing, then I think it is very valuable anytime you can get training to get it. So that way you're much more proficient using it. But the FAA just wants you to understand where you're operating at. So they want you to know who you're sharing airspace with, what kind of operations are in that area, where you should stay away from, those kinds of things. So what they've done is they have a written test that you need to take, the remote pilot exam. It's a written test from the FAA. And what we've kind of developed is a class. It's a one-day class. Basically, to take you through all that material, get you ready for the test. It's a cram design class, so we cram a lot of information. We put it into one day, but we also limited that class to 8 people for that day. That way it's a little bit more of an interactive class. We can get you through the material faster because for a lot of people it's easier just to schedule a day to study in this class and then take the test and be done with it versus prolonging the study process over a couple weeks. What you can do, I mean, you can self-study. There's information on the FAA website, but typically that would take a lot longer. It would take probably 2 to 3 weeks just because you don't have someone to interact with and ask questions, that kind of thing. But so we're doing these classes probably once a month, bouncing around the different locations at Frontier, but we also schedule them if we have, you know, a large enough class or the request, and we'll schedule them and have them on site for people as well. Field training, so that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, was that the field training for this type of equipment, FAA doesn't require it, but just like any equipment that you're using, you probably had some level of training or some level of guidance on how to use it. And the more training that you have, the more proficient you're going to be on it, and the better it's going to work for you. So again, we offer kind of a day training. That's all we really, for our Tier 1, Tier 2 packages, that's all we really feel that's required to really get proficient on the equipment and using the Field Seeker app and whatnot proficiently. Otherwise, in our more advanced packages, it could be up